Hey, welcome back to my channel. I'm thankful for every one of you that watches my videos, and it really is a blessing and an honor. I know sometimes it's tough, but we always find our way through the topic of the video. And today is going to be an exciting topic or series of topics, and I hope you find this video enjoyable. If you do, please feel free to comment, like, subscribe, or share with a friend, or don't, but either way, just grateful for the view, and hope you have a blessed day. Anyways, so today I'm going to be beginning by discussing some of the topics in Isaiah. The book of Isaiah was written in the 6th century BC by the prophet Isaiah. Well, the authorship is debated about Isaiah, but there's some scholarship says that Isaiah was split into 2 parts, or some scholars say 3 parts, and that some of Isaiah was written by the prophet Isaiah, and other parts were written after the Babylonian exile, which Isaiah was written before the Babylonian exile, which took place in the 4th century BC. But I think that Isaiah was written by Isaiah, especially since the parts that were by certain scholars are attributed later authorship are quoted by New Testament scholars, including Jesus, I believe, as being written by Isaiah. So anyways, Isaiah is a seer, and he has this series of prophetic visions and literary prophecies. And so I think he's a seer, he's a prophet, but his prophecies are less apocalyptic than, say, Daniel's or Ezekiel's, but a lot of overlap between these prophecies, considering that a lot of them are concerning the same events, or detailing different parts of those events. And all throughout the prophecies of Isaiah, even when he's prophesying about nations outside the nation of Israel, there is a thread of messianic identity that's being constructed, that is showing that God is going to make a way for the people, not just the Jews, but also the people who have been scattered throughout the whole world. And so Isaiah has prophecies against Egypt, against Assyria, and during Isaiah's time, Assyria was the instrument that God was using to capture the Israelites. And I don't know if you recall, but in the book of Kings, the Israelites were overthrown, and the capital of Samaria was captured by the Assyrian Empire. And Isaiah was alive during that time because Sennacherib, the Assyrian king, captured Israel, brought them into captivity, and then after that attacked Jerusalem and threatened Jerusalem, and basically made these great boasts against the God of Israel. And for that reason, the God of Israel humbled the king of Assyria by defeating his army through a supernatural judgment. But and then the king of Assyria ended up being killed and brought out of he went back to his land and was, I think, murdered by his own sons. So it shows that God uses these instruments, these people, and nations as instruments of his judgment and his sovereignty, but he still can put judgment on those instruments that he uses, as you've seen in Pharaoh, king of Egypt, during the time of the exile, in Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, during the time of their conquering of Israel, and in the use of Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon in overtaking many empires. And it's interesting, a lot of these kings, they're in the prophecies, there's a supernatural element that's given them to them as well. And a lot of the descriptions of these human kings can end up blurring the lines between their human nature and their obedience to the prince of this world, to Satan. And an example of that is in Ezekiel chapter 28 and Isaiah chapters 20 through 22. And so these kings definitely they're used by God, but they also have elements that are satanic in nature. And you can see that in the story of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel as well. His falling into idolatry, his proud heart, and then in his ultimate judgment that comes from the pride that kind of corrupts his soul. And so I think something to be said about Nebuchadnezzar's pride is that a lot of it was driven by superstitions, and because of his superstitions, he employed many different seers and wise men, and even mediums and spiritists, and he employed, the cosmologists and all the wise people of his age, and then he also got Yahwists, Jews who believed in the true God of Israel, and he included them in his entourage of intellectuals. And so these kings oftentimes were religious, and they were also seeking knowledge because they probably wanted both to increase their power and also to be able to lead their nations and maintain their rule and their authority, and to be the wisest people in their nation. So they would include all these intellectuals, and that's of course in the book of Daniel you see the failure of the public intellectuals, so to speak, that Nebuchadnezzar employs in comparison to the success of the followers of Yahweh, who are given supernatural insight from God into the future and are able to disclose information to Nebuchadnezzar that would be impossible to have by human means. And nevertheless, I think that precept translates into our modern times and into the last few centuries for rulers who rely on human intellect to make decisions, which obviously is important to use wisdom behind our decisions, but lots of times wisdom, when it's muddled or influenced by our own human judgment and our own being wise in our own eyes, can end up harming our souls, harming those around us, and harming all people. Remember, the knowledge of good and evil was the promise of the fruit that they ate, and for desire for good, to make good judgments and to see things correctly, can end up bringing about a different effect when it's polluted by our own pride. And an example of that is some of the virtuous movements of intellectuals to want to make society better, whether it is through criticisms of economics, criticisms of military, just criticisms in general of the way that society, criticisms of certain classes of people, whether it's racial or financial. These criticisms of the world basically come from human judgments, not just human intellect, but our our capacity and our function, which is as old as time, to weigh in the balance, to weigh things in the scales, to make moral judgments, and to posture our own intellect as the ultimate standard for the rest of the world, and to be surprised or even hurt or angered when the world doesn't end up fitting into the standards that our own understanding tries to place it within those confines and within those definitions. And so it reminds me of the proverb, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not lean on your own understanding, and in all of your ways acknowledge God, and he will make straight your paths. And maybe my last video, if you haven't watched it, go watch my last video, because this might kind of expand on this idea. But the notion that we can attain transcendence through our own judgments, through our own understanding, the idea that we can reach to the heavens and know the things of God purely through intellect and rationalism is, I think, another symptom of this proud condition of the heart, and that there's an aspect of God that can be known through our rational faculties, and in a sense there is a way for us to argue for God's existence and his nature and his character and his identity and his historicity. But then there's also a part of God that can never be argued through human words, and has to be understood only through submission of our lives to that God, and to the humble acknowledgement of his reality apart from our own understanding. And I think an example would be just for a human relationship, like my fiance. I know my fiance, and I'm grateful that we're going to be married soon. I know her very well, but I don't know her through arguing for her attributes. I don't know her through being able to detail and discuss the parts of her that I love. But I do love those things about her, and I would be able to discuss those things with other people. But in order for me to prove her existence or her character to another person, I would share my heart for her instead of try to argue and convince the other person about those things. And to the degree that I'm doing the latter of that, I'm essentially creating a smokescreen of words to protect or obfuscate or change or amplify or diminish the true character of my fiance. And I think that human arguments for God's existence can end up doing the same thing, and we can end up veiling our descriptions of what it means to be a believer, what it means to understand who God is, by our own intellect, our own moral judgments, our own wanting to master Scripture. And I think all of those desires for intellectual mastery over the Scriptures can end up obfuscating the reality of how we need to come to God. So these things start, the moral judgments and the faulty reasoning of human beings in their desire to reach for transcendence end up manifesting in some more grotesque ways in societies, and those deformities, those demoralizations, those degradations of our social and individual spirits can truly be the sign and the symptom of a national decline. And so it's interesting to see intellectuals, or whoever it is, I keep saying intellectuals, but just people who consider themselves as the highest authority, both intellectually and morally, to diagnose the downfalls of society as being something external to what is seated within the human condition and the true or hamartia, and that hubris will be the catalyst for the destruction of both the person and the nation that they belong to. And I think that some of those signs and symptoms are so glaringly in the face, but people deny their obviousness. And I think that the destruction of life at its beginning and its most fundamental essence, the you can think of the person who wants to invade the woman in the name of science, in the name of rights, in the name of a better life, a better circumstance, in the name of the survival of the fittest, and the championing of social justice and the triumph of technology. That, you can see that pictured in the man who is in the back of the abortion clinic with the tongs and the instruments. He's the scientist. He's the championing of women's rights. But what he's doing is a grotesque perversion, and he's crushing and mutilating human life, and turning the woman who is oftentimes unaware of the seriousness and the wickedness of her action into she's turning into a vessel for victimization and for destruction, basically. And when that kind of bloodshed, that taking of the innocent life is adopted by a society, it transcends the realm of the natural and goes into the realm of supernatural. It transcends the realm of social justice and desire for championing our rights, and enters into the worship of demons. And there's many ways where those things begin to manifest. And right when the church was coming into the first century, there were a lot of similar ideas. There were practices that maybe weren't abortion, but they were still troubling practices and beliefs that today could be seen. You can at least see their shadow in postmodernism and relativism and nihilism and naturalism and secularism, Marxism, and all the isms. These are not just human taught philosophies and ideologies. They are something deeper that is seeded into human hearts by the minds of the principalities. And one of the most glaring examples of this, you can kind of see that. Let me go back a little bit. You can see that that dual, the desire to follow Yahweh and the desire to have that true understanding are kind of united in the first century in the Hellenistic Jews. They are both outside of the nation of Israel, but they've been adopted into Israel, and they have a Hellenistic culture. But when these men were united with the Son of God, with Jesus Christ, they started realizing that God's salvation was for all people. And when they realized that only through the Son of God, that's the only way to salvation, they lost support from both the Hellenists, the philosophers, the worldly people, and the Jews, the religious Pharisees. They lost support from both of them, and a persecution broke out against these Hellenists. And the supreme example of that would be the stoning of Stephen. And so one of the people think that naturalism, the focus on the present world as it is something new, but there were naturalists and rationalists in the time of Jesus as well. Uh, but today, the ability for us to see into the things of science is so much more amplified through our technologies and through the evolving sentiments of modern rationalism and enlightenment. And so the emergence of Darwinian naturalism gave the materialistic worldview, the nothing but matter worldview, so much power that it takes, even if somebody is religious or does admit to a spiritual component, the naturalistic foundation in our last few generations that's been placed into the mind of man, creates such a firm stronghold for those who do want to reach for spirit that it's hard to shake. And it kind of takes a rewiring of the human psyche to be able to rationalize rationalize the need for God, the realization that the spirit exists, and so it's kind of interesting that now, in the wake of rationalism and enlightenment of the last few centuries, we have this return to supernatural desires, the desire for deity, the desire for meaning, the desire to understand our end, the afterlife, and it's because these, no matter how much you try to reason your way out of them, just like an elastic band, you will end up snapping back to this fundamental truth of human being, which is that despite our high rising ambitions, there will be a humbling of the human heart, and a return of the reasoning faculties of human beings back to the origin and the source of our being, which is, well, there's two origins and source of our being. The first is our natural creation by our Creator, and the second is our deception by the enemy of our hearts. And those are two origins of who we are that we can never escape, no matter how smart we are, no matter what country we belong to, no matter what ideology we adopt. There are things that are common to our being, and there's no way around that. And I think that's why there has to be a savior, a general savior for humankind, is because these things that are common to man will be perceived ultimately in one man. That one man will have to both adopt the attributes of our Creator and also have to adopt the sinful picture of all of human being into one body. And in that double nature, the mind of sinful man, which is death, the punishment that we've been accruing for thousands of years, and the deity, the reality of God, in one human being, have to both walk to their end and go to the cross, and then die and rise again, and not just in a metaphysical sense, but in a very physical, real, historical sense. And then not only rise, but then leave and come back at the end of time, so that every eye will see him, and every single person will realize that this, they knew who this person was, they knew who this God is, and therefore are, like it says in Romans chapter 1, without excuse. And when Jesus, before he goes to the cross and he's on trial, he is asked basically by the high priest, "Are you the Son of God?" And he says, "Yes, I am, and you will see the Son of Man returning on the clouds of glory." And so his response was referencing the deity of, it was doing a number of things, but it was referencing the deity of Yahweh, the second Yahweh figure that's laid out in the Old Testament, his return at the end of all time, and his identity as being both the Son of God and the Son of Man. And so in him you have that united person who ultimately has to adopt the sin, not that he sins, but he takes upon himself the sin, and he's only able to do that because he is blameless. So he absorbs, you could say, the sin of all people and walks to the cross. And on the cross, it says in I believe it's 1 Corinthians, he makes a public spectacle of all these powers that have deceived humanity from the beginning, all these demons. And in that moment, you see their judgment, at least you see a foreshadowing of their judgment and their demise, which was also prophesied in Psalm chapter 82, when God says, "You will all die like men," to the gods, to the principalities. And on that cross, Jesus destroys the principalities. He triumphs over them, and but at the same time, it's kind of hard for us, because even as Christians, we see this pull, this tension between the world and the things of God, between the flesh and the spirit, between the devil and good things that God wants for us. We see this pull, and so the principalities are very much still alive, still doing their things, still at work. But what Jesus is saying when he tells Caiaphas, "You will see the Son of Man," is that even though it seems like you have victory over me, and the devil has victory over me, and this hour of darkness has victory over me, in the future there will be total victory over all of those things and the principalities. I mean, people today think that all these ideas are alive and Jesus is dead, but it's the reality is that all these ideas are going to die and Jesus is going to live. The principalities are going to meet their demise. They fear their destruction, but Jesus is going to be authenticated, going to be vindicated at the end of all time. And so during these principalities are seeding ideas, and we're creating these ideas, and man works in unison with the God that they worship, and there's a connection there. And then as people are degenerated and brought back down to their baser forms by these ideas and these notions, the forms of worship become more and more degenerate. In Rome, in the 3rd and 4th century, you started to see the decline of Roman society because of, it's often debated why it was degenerating, but it's most likely because of the moral degradation, because of the worship of false gods. Many of these gods who were figments of the human imagination, but who had also a very real demonic presence behind them. And it's almost like, I like to put it this way when people laugh at me or get confused because of my suggestion that they're worshiping demons. Empty worship is what we dedicate ourselves to, the object of all of our affection, all of our time, our energy, our focus. And when those are offered up empty, into empty space, there is an entity that can adopt them and incorporate them into his own being and his own power. And in the last days, what we're told about Jesus is there is one figure who, just like Jesus adopted all the goodness of God, there's one figure that adopts all the evil of the devil, and in the last days deceives all of humankind. And his cryptic name in the Bible is the abomination of desolation. And in the New Testament, he's revealed as the Antichrist. So he's opposed to the things of Christ, and he's also an abomination in the eyes of God, and he brings desolation into the humankind. So remember what I began talking about in this discussion is Isaiah's prophecies of all these nations being lands of desolation. Egypt being a land that's desolate in the midst of other desolate nations. Damascus being destroyed, being wiped out. Moab, God's wrath being poured out on Moab. All these visions and designs of judgment, and that they happen for a reason. It's not like God just arbitrarily chooses to destroy. Moral degradation and judgment and degeneracy and the disintegration of society end up going hand in hand. There's a connection between those things. So anyways, let's keep going here. We talked a little bit about the signs and the symptoms of that degeneracy in modern times, and what you can see is that one of the things God hates, and one of the signs of judgment and the decline of a human soul, is the evidence of hypocrisy, which itself is usually invisible to the person. People don't recognize their own hypocrisy, so that's why hypocrisy and pride are very united. God sees the hypocrisy, and Jesus is able to see hypocrisy of the Pharisees. But one of the signs of society in this decline is going to be hypocrisy. And remember, in Matthew 24, Jesus is talking about the signs of the end of the age. This happens directly after the confrontation with the Pharisees, an extended period of time in the temple, where he is coming up and clashing with the hypocrites, and then he pronounces a judgment in the 7 woes on the attitude of these hypocrites, and he basically exposes them for who they are. So hypocrisy is going to be envisioned in these a hypocrisy is going to be manifesting in the last days. And I think an example of that in modern times and of our society's hypocrisy is the inability to show truth on the news, an inability to reveal what's actually happening, or to characterize both sides of a given issue equally and give them both equally breathing room. And I actually was a victim of this personally. I went to an abortion rally, and I was the only person at the abortion rally who was against abortion, and because I made a scene, I ended up having not a violent scene, obviously, but I did speak up, and I ended up having the news interview me, and the news blocked my. They mischaracterized my entire argument after I made a very solid case for life on the news. What they did was they chose the weakest part of my argument and mischaracterized me, and then they chose the best of the pro-choice demonstration, and in the face of my entire community and in my statewide, they made me look like a fool, like a weak person, and made me look like a tyrant and like a anti-woman person. It was just very, very evil and very demonic. And so society can't look at the truth of what it is, and when it's revealed that, it hides it from itself, it hides it from the world, and it punishes those who reveal its own twisted demonic nature. You can think of people who sit in front of abortion clinics and block access for people who want to kill their babies. They're thrown in jail, and the doctors and nurses who perform these grotesque demonic practices are championed as enlightened, good people who are friends of, they're good people in the society. And so the championing of that is a sign of a society's eventual, and I would say imminent, collapse. Like God says in Isaiah, woe to those who call evil good, and woe to those who call good evil. You know, one of the characteristics of Satan was that he was the most beautiful angel. He was glorious. He was manifested in splendor, and in Tyre, in the prophecy against Tyre, some of the attributes of Satan are revealed to us, that he was perfect in wisdom and perfect in beauty, and it's almost as though you could find no flaw in him. And what was the first flaw that was starting to manifest? It was pride, and it says that pride was wickedness. And when that was realized, as soon as that was realized, he fell. Jesus says, "I saw Satan fall from like lightning from heaven," and along with all the other demonic angels, they fell, and they whether they fell before the creation of the world or after, during the time of Genesis, and whether they fell before or after, the point is that they fell because they wanted to exalt themselves. So that idea of self-exaltation, exaltation of our own wisdom, coming before our humbling, our falling, is also demonstrated in the story of Nebuchadnezzar, who I personally think is the clearest prefigure of the Antichrist laid out in the Old Testament. So, because for a number of reasons, because he is named the King of Kings, so he's a worldly king. He has a knowledge of God and in some ways a respect for God, but he also threatens God's people and creates an image for himself that he demands the entire kingdom to bow down and worship. And that's a clear picture of what the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, who's going to be revealed in the last days, is going to look like. So all this to say, you don't have to understand all this stuff, but because ultimately what it means to be a Christian isn't to understand everything, but to submit to our Creator, to submit to our God, and to follow him in the only way that he has made for all nations that were disinherited at the beginning in Genesis chapter 11, to come back to him. And that was by being lifted up, not lifting up himself, but being lifted up by the world in judgment of the world and of the powers over Jesus Christ. He was being destroyed by the devil and the world, but they didn't know that by doing that they were forecasting their own demise. They were forecasting their own defeat. They thought they had victory over Jesus, but by lifting him up, they caused all the world to be able to see what he did for them. That those who saw the Master, those who saw the King of Kings and Lord of Lords lifted up, and even on his head wearing a crown of thorns, and above his head having a title saying a king of the Jews in all the languages of that time. That was a preview of his entrance into humanity as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, whom every knee will bow, even those who didn't want to in this life. It doesn't matter, every knee will bow to him. And so that's why Isaiah has this threat. The book of Isaiah has a dual nature. It's a threat of, you could look at it as corresponding to the Deuteronomy set of blessings and curses. The threat of the curse for disobedience that extends not just to the Jews, although they're the primary focus of the prophets, but also to the other nations, because ultimately God is not just the God of the Jews, he's the God of Gentiles also. But in this is the promise of reconciliation, the promise of the ability to repent, and the desire for God to have his people and all people turn to him and believe in him and follow him, and that's why he made the way as clear as he could, yet he also veiled it to those who were wise in their own eyes and to those who thought that they had their own understanding. And that's pretty much all that I wanted to say today, and I hope that this made sense to you. And if it didn't, please let me know in the comments about something you'd like me to clarify. Of course, this was I wanted to begin and end in the book of Isaiah, because I think Isaiah is, in the Old Testament, one of the clearest books of God's heartbeat for his people, his desire for them to worship him in spirit and truth. And you see the voice of Christ and his spirit revealing himself to people, also his power and his judgment and his just holiness that are going to be manifested in the last days, and indeed already were manifested historically and fulfilled. All the judgments on these nations were fulfilled, but will be fulfilled in a more ultimate sense at the end of the historical timeline. So anyways, hope this was helpful for you. If it was, please share it with somebody and give it a like and a comment. God bless you.